You know, we use the word family a lot here. We use the word family a lot when we're talking about one another. But one thing I've discovered over the years is that my family isn't normal. How many of you say that your family isn't normal either? Raise your hand. All right, well, there's a few of you, about a half a dozen, all right, that admit it. The rest of you won't yet, but that's okay. And so it makes me feel better to know that I'm not the only abnormal one here. But the thing is, how many of your children would say that it's the parents' fault that the family's not normal? All right, yeah, I figured I'd get a lot of, I got some really excited hands back there, so I was emphatic. But my children would probably say that started with me, you know, that the reason our family isn't normal is because of me, but our family isn't normal by many standards, by societal standards, because October 8th, 2014, nearly 8 years ago, our family went from 4 to 6. Our family took on 2 additional children at once. And, you know, typically that happens when you have twins. Well, there aren't any twins in our family, just so you know. Bradley and Maddie aren't twins. Allison and Maddie aren't twins, separated by several years. That's not how it happened. But overnight, our family, the number of children in our household increased by 100%. And that's an interesting change, let me tell you. I mean, when you go from a family of 4 to family of 6, from having 2 children to having 4 children, and they were cute. You know, they were cute, right? I mean, they were cute. Now, if any of you didn't realize, Bradley was small once. And so if you don't know who Bradley is, who our son is, then he can raise his hand. But you can meet him after, and if you see us next to each other, I have to look up to him now. You know, I wear boots for a reason. But he was small once, and on that day, our family changed. And it was an exciting day, right? I mean, we were so excited, but we were anxious too. I mean, there was a word we used too. I mean, we were anxious and we were terrified. Like, we were terrified for several reasons, because when things change so suddenly, we're not prepared for it. I mean, I hope you guys aren't way better at that than we were, but when things change overnight, we're just not prepared, and we have so many questions, and there's fear that comes into play, and there's doubts that come into play, and then you incorporate these new individuals into your family, and you know, things begin to change and shift and adjust, and there are tensions, and somebody's stepping on somebody else's toes, and somebody's crossing the line in the back seat, and you know what that leads to, right? I mean, like an all-out fist fight. And so there are these things that shift. And if somebody had Bradley in class, he did like to read. I mean, he won't hardly do it now, but he liked to read. And so we work on, but we start making these adjustments. We start asking these questions. And even though Bradley liked to read, Maddie, this face, she still has it. So ask her, she can show you. But we make these adjustments, but we ask lots of questions. We ask questions like, how do we prepare for these changes? How do I respond? Like, what's my response to this when things get hard and there's tension, and when somebody doesn't get along? How do I respond? And then we ask this one question a lot. What if we mess up? What if we mess up? Anybody else ever ask that question? What if I mess up? And then we went even further and asked, well, what if we do something to mess them up? What if we do something to mess up like really bad, and we make a terrible decision, not that decision that day, but after the fact, in the process, we mess up. What if that happens? And you know what we realized? Well, we messed up a lot. I mean, we messed up a lot. I mean, we messed up royally sometimes. My wife and I, we just did. I mean, that was just part of the process, and our children would agree wholeheartedly that we messed up. And we got frustrated, and we were quick to be angry at times, and we got too harsh too quickly, and we didn't offer grace often enough, and so we operated a lot of the times out of desperation, structure, and rules just to try and make it through, right? Trying to figure out how to be the parents of 4 children. And so we messed up, and we did those things. And so often, we often saw law as a way to get through without enough grace. You know, those structures and rules and things that we did, we saw those as a way to get through without offering enough grace. But, you know, the thing I'm thankful for is that even as our family changed and shifted and grew, is that we didn't have all the answers, right? We didn't make all the right decisions. We didn't do everything right the first time, the third, the fourth, the 10th time. We didn't do that as parents. We didn't make the right decisions all the time. But what I've realized is that we weren't alone. We weren't alone in that. We weren't alone in trying to figure out how to balance law and grace, how to balance rules and restrictions in our household and balance forgiveness and balance love, how to find that tightrope, how to walk those different and navigate those things in our lives. We weren't alone. Because there were other families around us who were facing the same things. There were other families who were asking the same questions. And then we go back into God's Word, and even those who knew Christ and had even walked with Him struggled with the same things that we were. And so when we look today, this morning, we're going to look at a letter written by the Apostle Paul to a group of believers in Rome. And this group of believers, they were Christians. Those who had already accepted Christ, but they couldn't figure out, many of them, but they couldn't figure out either the distinction and the tightrope, this balance between law and grace. And they were in this constant tension and argument about those being born of the blood and those in the law and those who were born of faith. Those who didn't seem to fit into the family. They were in this constant struggle to balance those things. And so this morning we're going to read again in Romans chapter 4, what Tyler read for us this morning, and look at those verses. In chapter 4, verses 13 through 17, this letter that Paul writes addressing these tensions between law and grace that he wrote many years ago, but so applicable to me and us today. And so he starts in verse 13 saying, "For the promise to Abraham or to his descendants that he would inherit the world." So this promise that was made to Abraham, who's going to be the father of many nations, that he would inherit the world and his descendants would inherit the world, was not through the law, but through the righteousness that comes by faith. If those who are of the law are heirs, faith is made empty. I want you to hear that word. Faith is made empty. What's the condition? What makes faith empty? If those who are only under the law become heirs, become children, then faith is made empty. It is negated. It's no longer necessary. It doesn't exist. It's empty. It's void. And the promise nullified. It's canceled out. Because the law produces wrath, and where there is no law, there is no transgression. The law produces wrath. Where there is no law, there is no wrath. There's no wrong. There's no broken rule if there is no law. Verse 16, this is why the promise is by faith, so that it may be according to grace, to guarantee it to all the descendants, not only to the one who is of the law, but also to the one who is of Abraham's faith. He is the father of us all. You see, at this point, and they realize this, but at the same time, they're still struggling with it. It was over 400 years from the time that Abraham was given the promise, this covenant from God, because of his faith, not because of law, because the Mosaic law didn't exist yet. This law that was handed down from God to Moses was over 400 years later. And yet they were still arguing and fighting about those who had the best position in the family. Those who were born Hebrew, those who were born into the nation of Israel, and those who weren't, the Gentiles. Those who were outside of the blood, didn't have the family tie, weren't under this rule of law. And they were constantly bickering about who was first in the family or who had the right opportunities. And in verse 17 it says, "As it is written, I have made you the father," Abraham, "I have made you the father of many nations in the presence of the God in whom he believed, the one who gives life to the dead and calls things into existence that do not exist." You see, in his wisdom and love and grace, God the Father saw fit to offer us a position in his family. God the Father saw fit to offer me and you and everyone in this room, everyone on this earth who has been and will be, a position in his family. He offered us the opportunity to have that position. But the thing is, many wanted to say that the promise was only to certain individuals who were born of a certain family. They had the right blood, or they were born into the law and they did the right things. That only those people were really offered a position in that family, in God's family. And that's what they wanted to say. But you see, the thing is, your position and my position that it's offered, it's guaranteed. My position offered by God himself is guaranteed. Now, the offer is guaranteed, but the position is not. Not until it's accepted. So the offer is promised, but it's not positioned yet until we accept it. Now, when God offers us the position, because as we said, our families aren't normal, right? They don't fit some cookie cutter definition, because my family isn't absolutely normal by society's standards. And the thing is that when we look at the offer that God made to us, it doesn't matter who our earthly family is. It doesn't matter what our blood connection is. It doesn't matter where we were born, who we were born to, what rule of law we're under. It doesn't matter, because God has openly offered each and every one of us a position. But it's not the position of mother-in-law or stepson. God isn't offering me the position of third cousin twice removed. He's not offering me a position that is only contingent on marriage, and if that marriage is broken, and then I'm out. That's not the kind of position that God offers me. It's not contingent on anything that we or I can do. I can't negate the offer that God has given me to have a chance to be his child. You can't negate it either. Because God's offer to each and every one of us is not through the law. Thank you, Lord. It's not through the law. It's not based on my best behavior either, which I'm thankful for that, because I'm out. I mean, it's based on my best behavior. I mess up. I sin. I do the wrong things. And he tells us in his word, in the verses that we read, that the law produces wrath. The law produces death. If I break a rule, there are consequences. If I touch a hot stove, which my parents told me often when I was little, I get burned. And we know these things. When I stay too out too late at night, and I did those things and broke curfew when I was younger, and my parents are waiting up, there are consequences. Because I broke the law of my household when I was growing up, and there were consequences. If I look at things on my phone that I shouldn't be looking at, then the phone gets removed, and I get grounded, and I have to stay in my room. I have all those things that have to happen. Not that I ever got grounded. Not at all. But the law produces wrath. Payment is required. Justice must be served. If we go back into the Old Testament, we see that when the Mosaic law was given to Moses, the consequence for breaking that law was payment in blood. There had to be a sacrifice. There had to be an offering that was made. There had to be atonement made for any wrong that was done, anything that was done contrary to break those laws. And so for those of us still at home, if you're still at home under your parents' rules and under the rules of your household, just be thankful that you're not a Jewish girl or boy growing up in a Jewish household if you don't like rules, because the Mosaic Law outlined 613 rules. 613 mitzvahs or commandments that a Jewish boy or girl was held with under and had to try and uphold these rules. And if they broke any one of those rules, then it negated it all. There had to be atonement. There had to be a payment for that. And so imagine trying to keep those 613 rules every day. But that's where the people of Rome, this Roman body of believers, find themselves in comparing themselves to each other under this system of law. That, hey, today I only broke 3 rules and he broke 6. So he's much worse than I am. I'm 50% better than he is today. And so they find themselves comparing one another through these laws and giving themselves a different status in the family of God because of these rules that they do or do not break, but none of us and none of them could ever maintain. They couldn't maintain all 613 laws or commands every day without fail for their entire lives. So what we find is this statement that is so important. And we've already learned that it's not by the law, it's not by my best behavior, and it's not by blood alone, but by grace through faith. It's not by blood alone, but by grace through faith. Because even the Jewish people struggled with this thought that if I was born into the Jewish family, if I was born a Hebrew, then I had rights that others did not have. And so they even struggled with holding themselves accountable to the system of blood where I was born into the right family, but a Gentile, someone outside of the Hebrew race, was not. And so they didn't have the same rights that I had. But you see, God's offer, as we said earlier, it's not conditional. He's not keeping a list and retracting his offer that he's made to us to be in the family. If we mess up too many times today, it's not conditional. Now, I've got a picture here, and you guys tell me who it is. So this is a picture of Queen Elizabeth. And so Queen Elizabeth recently passed away after more than 70 years in rule. She reigned over this monarchy for 70 years, one of the longest reigning monarchs in history, which is astounding. I mean, that's an amazing accomplishment. She did amazing things. But the thing that astounds me is this process of succession. How does someone become a king or a queen? How does is someone able to be lifted to the status of a king or a queen? Because when we're little and we're imagining ourselves in our future and we're playing like we're imagining that we are a prince going to rescue a damsel in distress, or for young ladies, if they're the damsel in distress, going to be rescued by a handsome prince. And then if that actually happens, then all your dreams are crushed. The dreams are destroyed because in this system of succession, the only ones who can be an heir to the throne have to be born by blood. They have to be of a royal family line. It's blood alone that qualifies them to serve in that position. And so if you don't have the right bloodline, you're not born into the right family, then you don't stand a chance. But I'm grateful that God's offer is not that way. That God's offer doesn't depend on me being born into the right family. And that when he offers us a position into his family, and I agreed to the adoption terms, I became a joint heir. When you agree to the adoption terms that Jesus has set forth, that God has laid out on behalf of his Son, through his Son and his death and resurrection, when we agree, we become a joint heir. I'm going to read you 3 verses in Romans chapter 8. And in these 3 verses, it talks about this inheritance that we have. And I want you to listen. I want you to pay attention to the 3 uses of the word heir in these verses. And it says this: "For you did not receive a spirit of slavery to fall back into fear. Instead, you received the spirit of adoption, by whom we cry out, 'Abba, Father.' The Spirit himself testifies together with our spirit that we are God's children, and if children, also heirs, heirs of God and co-heirs with Christ, if indeed we suffer with him, so that we may also be glorified with him. So 3 times in these 3 verses, Paul uses the word heir. And in the Greek, it's the word kleronomeo. And this word kleronomeo literally means that you are a legal heir. You have all rights to the possessions and the properties that is left behind by your parents. By your parents, though your father and a mother or those in position just above you, you become a legal heir. But in the third use of the word heir, kleronomeo, in this passage, Paul adds a prefix to it. He adds 3 letters, just 3 letters that completely change the meaning, because the Jewish people knew about inheritance, because it was about birthright and being the firstborn and getting the most of the inheritance possible. And your birth order, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, by the 6th, you aren't getting much. But the birth order determines what you get. And the firstborn gets the most, right? So where do you want to be? But do you have any choice? No. You have no choice whatsoever. It's based on birth. But Paul adds this 3-letter word to kleronomeo in the third use, and it's sin. Now, not the sin that we think of, S-I-N, not a broken relationship with God, the things that we do to break our relationship with God, but S-Y-N. He adds this prefix to kleronomeo, which causes it to change the definition, that you're no longer inheritant by blood, but you're a joint heir. You're a joint heir. You're now an heir together with the firstborn. What? To a Jewish man, Jewish male especially, because that was the birth order, it was the sons. And to a Jewish male, they're going to be perking up right then and wondering, what is he saying? Because he's saying that they are the same, have the same inheritance rights that I do as the firstborn, that they're a joint heir with me, that they inherit the same as I do. That's unheard of. That's wrong. I'm pretty sure there's a rule against that, is what they're thinking. But when Paul says this to us, he says that if we accept the adoption terms, we are now joint heirs, have full rights to the inheritance of Jesus himself. We are joint heirs with Christ. Now, 6 years after we began the adoption process, after that day when our family went from 4 to 6, we go in and we have the opportunity 6 years later to sign a piece of paper, an adoption agreement. And we go into the courtroom that day and we sign this agreement. There's some language. There's a couple lines in the agreement that I want to share with you. And anytime a legal adoption is signed, there's language to this effect. And it states that the above named will now and henceforth have the same legal rights as an heir to any property or possession as those of biological birth to the adopting party or parties. They are now having the same legal rights as any born heir. They are co-heirs, joint heirs, heirs together to the full adoption. So when we're gone, the kids get to split Jana's shoes, and I might have a few rundown tools. And so they get it all. But we become joint heirs. I now have, when I agree to the terms, the same rights as the son. That's amazing. To the firstborn of God, Jesus Christ himself, I have the same rights as the son. So on that day when we signed that agreement, we had a picture of our family in the courtroom. And somehow, in the same year, 6 years after going from a family of 4 to 6, somehow we went to a family of 7. And there's a picture that shows that because we gained a son-in-law. And for about a year, I promise I lost weight because I couldn't find food anywhere. I just couldn't find it. I'm going to address it. But when this happened and our family became legal, there was a legal adoption. There was joy, and I've got this picture. And somebody tries to rob all the attention, of course, but it became official. It became legal heirs, legal children, and there was a celebration. And the thing is that when that adoption took place, when we are adopted into the family, we have been adopted and positioned in the family of Christ when we agree to the adoption terms. We're not only just adopted, we're positioned. And we're going to talk more about positioning next week. But the position that we gain is the fact that we become an heir, an heiress, a child of the King. We become children of God. That's something to celebrate, amen? We become children of the one true God. Pastor and theologian Charles Spurgeon years ago, he went to a lady's house and was visiting her. She was ill. And when he walks into her house, he finds that it is run down, falling down around her. She is living in complete poverty. And she visits with this woman, and on the wall, he notices a document that's framed. It's not very legible. He can't make it all out, but he'd seen similar documents before. And so he asked this woman, "Can I have this document examined? Can I take it with me?" And she agrees. And he goes and takes the document, has it professionally examined, and finds out that is the last will and testament of her former employer. Her former employer, who she worked for, had died suddenly, didn't get a chance to share with this woman her final wishes. And what Charles Spurgeon learned was that in this will and testament, he found out that this woman, who was very wealthy, had left instructions in her will to provide for her employee, who she loved, for the rest of her life. To provide housing, to provide shelter, to provide whatever she needed. And yet this woman was living in absolute poverty with a house falling down around her because she couldn't read. And she didn't know what that piece of paper hanging on the wall said. And she'd lived that way for years. And then when she heard the offer and understood what the offer meant, she was so extremely excited because it was like being given a new life. How often have we heard of or seen the offer that God has made to us to become heirs, become children, become a daughter or a son? And we look at that offer, we've left it sitting or hanging there. We believe it, but have we accepted it? So today the question, as we continue, we begin closing out this morning, the question is this. The adoption terms are simple because in His Word, God says that all we have to do is confess with our mouths that Jesus is Lord and believe in our hearts that God raised Him from the dead, and we will be saved. We will be adopted as a son or a daughter, and that's it. So today, if you believe that Jesus was raised from the dead, and he was raised, he died and He rose from the dead on your behalf, then all that's left is to confess with our mouths that He is Lord. And we'll be saved, be given a position in the family that can't be taken away. Would you stand with me this morning?